Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and thank you for, well, it's the penultimate episode of the Full Stack GraphQL Book Club. Hi, Will. How's it going?
Hey, Alex, I'm good. Penultimate, that's a good word. Funny story. In college, I had a assignment that something about some algorithm we were supposed to implement, and it mentioned penultimate, and I had no idea what that word meant, so I had to look it up. So that's a good one.
Yeah, yeah, it's the second to final episode. So yeah, chapter 8. So today the chapter title is called Deploying Our Full Stack GraphQL Application. So over the course of the past 7 episodes, we worked on a little web app that gives or that shows recommendations on and ratings for, not really recommendations, but more ratings for venues and shops, libraries, restaurants, stuff like that. And last week we did authentication. So now we have a user that can log in and then can give a review on a certain venue where they've been and give it stars and then see what the average rating for the venue is in terms of comparing to others. I guess that's then somehow almost leads to a recommendation, I guess. And yeah, and this has been growing and has been fostered a little bit over the last weeks or so. And now episode 8, I guess we're going into getting it ready to the harshness of the wild world out there.
Sending our baby app out into the world. Yep.
Yeah. So that's what we do today. So I'm looking forward to this. If you haven't watched any previous episodes, don't worry. You can just tag along and follow up on the previous episodes. They're all collected in a playlist. The video, find it in the video description. You also find the book link down there. So if you want to download that book, haven't read the book before, there's a free ebook available you can download. Just go on the link in the video description. I'll post a link in chat in a few seconds as well, so you find it there. And yeah, as with the previous episode, we are giving away a signed copy of the book. So Michael already had typed in the secret keyword. That's !Raffle. So if you want to win a book signed by Will and want to get the physical copy to your, it's not a not an NFT. we send the actual print, paper print to you. Real deal.
An NFB, a non-fungible book, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Type in !Raffle. We'll do the drawing when we before we do the exercises. So you have a few more minutes. So if you watched, and this only works, I need to say this only works on YouTube or Twitch. If you watch it on other channels, you need to jump over to either YouTube or Twitch. It's very easy to do so. So if you watch this live, just jump on over youtube.com/Neo4j, twitch.tv/Neo4j. Either of them work, and then you can enter the raffle. And yeah, I guess with that, I let me get this here, and I think we can get it started. Maybe one more thing. If you have questions, any feedback, any comments, anything else on the book, on the series, on general GraphQL stuff, please don't be shy. Use the chat function or comment on the LinkedIn video. We'll see it all, and we will try to react on it. So yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I think Alex did a good job of summarizing kind of where we are at this point. We've built a fully functioning business reviews application with user sign-in and all of that in previous weeks. And today, really what we want to talk about is deploying our application, but really using modern cloud services. So there's lots of options. I should start off to talk about kind of choosing what services and what deployment options to use. And what we end up using in the book is Netlify, AWS Lambda, and Neo4j Aura. So we've talked about Neo4j Aura a little bit. Neo4j Aura is Neo4j's cloud managed database as a service. So we'll take a little bit of a look at that today. Netlify, if you're not familiar with Netlify, Netlify allows us to build and deploy web applications. And one feature that it has that's really nice is Netlify functions. So alongside our React app, we can convert our GraphQL API to a Netlify function, which gets deployed as an AWS Lambda function. I think tools like Netlify, Vercel is in a similar category. Cloudflare has a similar offering called Cloudflare Pages. I think really what these tools do is give us a really, really nice developer experience on top of cloud services like AWS Lambda. If you've ever built and deployed something directly on AWS Lambda, there can be a lot of button clicking in the console to set up things. So Netlify gives us a really nice developer experience. And that's one of the main things we talk about in the book, is kind of the looking at different trade-offs. I'll zoom in a bit here. Different trade-offs for our deployment decisions. And I really kind of wanted to establish, I guess, kind of like a framework here for how to think about this as you're evaluating different services and things to think about, like pricing, scalability, vendor lock-in, these kinds of things. But I think there's an important way to think about deployment from both the user's perspective, but then also from the developer's perspective. And so from the user's perspective, so that's what this diagram is getting at here is, okay, we are using a web application. We want it to be fast. And so one advantage that we have of deploying our React app to Netlify is that's pushed to the Netlify CDN, the content delivery network, which has edges all over the world. So no matter where my user is, that page is going to load fast, because it's not going to have to travel. The request is not going to have to travel all the way around the world to load my React app. And then GraphQL data fetching code that goes to AWS Lambda. User doesn't really care about that, other than it behind the scenes should be fast and scalable. Behind the scenes, that's talking to our Aura cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And if we compare that, I'll skip ahead here. I think I have there we go. So here's the diagram from the developer perspective. Because I think it's important to think about things like developer experience as well. How fast can I push out new features? Is my deployment pipeline kind of a pain for developers to hassle with, and they're spending time pushing things to production rather than building new features? So from the developer's perspective, we've seen some of the developer tooling that's available with Neo4j Aura. So things like Browser, Bloom, the sort of tooling. With Netlify, what's really nice is we'll be able to connect Netlify to GitHub. So we're going to push our application to GitHub, and Netlify is then able to build and deploy our application from a branch on GitHub. So typically we have the main branch. There's lots of different ways to organize GitHub depending on how large of a team we're working with and these sorts of things. But typically we deploy from the main branch. As we add new features, we can add that to a new branch and trigger what's called a preview build on Netlify, so that we can see our updated application and send that out to users for testing and things like that without having to override our production deployment, which is quite nice. So I guess the point I want to make there is, as we're thinking about different options for deploying our application, we want to think about the benefits for the user, of course, but also for our developers as well, in terms of having a smooth developer experience is going to help us ship new features, really. So that's kind of at a high level what we're thinking about. The book walks through, in this chapter, we walk through using Aura, which we used in, I think, chapter 3 in the book club. We took a look at Aura. So maybe I'll skip over that. We talk about setting up Netlify, which I'll switch over to Netlify so we can see how this works in a minute, but this is covered in the chapter as well, and especially the GitHub piece. We talk about how to push your project up to GitHub, how to import that into Netlify, and then how to trigger some of the preview builds, adding new features, these sorts of things. We also convert our app to use Apollo Server Lambda. So because we're deploying our app as a serverless function, as a Netlify function, which then gets deployed as a AWS Lambda, there's a few tweaks we need to make. This is kind of the basic structure. You can see that we're pulling in a different version of Apollo Server. There's a build Apollo Server Lambda, specifically to handle the case where we want to deploy to a serverless function. Not much changes. There's a couple of tweaks in the code. We'll take a look at that. But really, it's nice for developer experience here because we're able to combine our React app and our GraphQL API. Previously, we had two kind of separate projects for these, and we'd have to run one and make sure the other was running. But we're able to combine these into a single code base, which is quite nice. Netlify has a command line tool, Netlify CLI, allows us to run things locally and do lots of good stuff with Netlify, like trigger builds and so on. So we switch over here, we can take a look. So I have Aura running here, a bunch of different databases running. We'll come back to Aura in a second. So here's Netlify, and I've already set this up, so we can go take a look at this project on GitHub. I was playing around with it this morning just to make sure everything was in order. Let's zoom in a bit. So I've created this repository, full stack GraphQL Netlify. And if we take a look at this, this is pretty similar to the code that we had from the last chapter, after chapter 7, where we added authorization and authentication. Some of the changes that we've made, though, is that we now have this Lambda directory alongside our React application source. And there's one file in there, GraphQL.js. And if we take a look at that, we can see our GraphQL API converted to a Lambda function using Apollo Server Lambda. And we kept things all in one file kind of for simplicity here. So there's a little bit that changes with initializing the server and exporting a handler in this case, which is the way that we deal with Netlify functions. And we connect that to Netlify, and that will trigger a deployment of our app on our own domain here. So you can see we get a custom domain for our Netlify app. And we can configure this if I think in the book we talked through how to add a custom domain and things like that, but we'll skip that for today. And then locally, I can run Netlify dev, and this will run my application locally, including my Lambda function. And so now everything is running locally. So this is nice for local development. We can go through the login process. Cool, now we're authenticated. Cool, so I think that covers a lot of what we talk about in the book. We do talk a bit about Bloom since we're using Aura, but I think we cover that in the exercises today. So maybe we'll just save that for the exercises piece. I'll pause here and check if we have any comments or questions before we jump into the exercises.
I don't see any questions, any comments. So I think we can probably do the raffle first and then go into the exercises. If you have any questions, anything, then we can we can cover them in later. Oh, here's a question from Gershon. We have graph with multiple labels like sensor factory 2, and so on, with almost similar props. How to define single common type definitions for sensor factory 2 in GraphQL? I guess this is not necessarily connected to this chapter now, so I don't know if you want to do a detour.
Yeah, we can touch on that briefly. Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of ways to go here. The sort of inherent mapping with the Neo4j GraphQL library is mapping GraphQL types to labels in the database. So if you have a single label that maps to a single type. Now, in Neo4j, we can have multiple labels on a node. In GraphQL, there's a couple of ways to approach that. One would be, let's take a look at the documentation here. Neo4j docs, GraphQL manual. One would be to look at the additional labels, which I think is in the node directive, I think is where that is located. So if we take a look at directives, node, additional labels. So this would be something to look at, and I'll drop this in our chat. Alex, if you could share that.
Yep.
There we go. I have a new keyboard today, and it has the Windows keys.
Your muscle memory is still on the old keyboard.
Well, yeah. So that, but it's a Kinesis keyboard, so it's kind of split, which is fine. It's quite nice. But the thing that bothers me the most is it has the Windows keys and the Windows mapping, and not the Mac keys. So every time I copy paste, I'm a little a little slow there. But anyway. Yeah, so take a look at this additional labels in the node directive. This will allow you to define additional labels that should be added to the Cypher query when it's generated to match against multiple labels for still a single type. So that might give you what you're looking for. Another thing to approach is possibly thinking about interfaces or union types. I'm not sure if that is going to be quite what you want. We're going to take a look at using GraphQL abstract types, like interfaces and unions, in the next chapter. I don't think that's quite what you want here, but take a look at the additional labels in the node directive.
Cool.
And in general, looking at all the directives that are available with the Neo4j GraphQL library. Directives are how we configure the generated GraphQL API with the Neo4j GraphQL library. There's a ton of directives here that allow you a lot of that sort of fine-grained control. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Keep them coming. So I think before we dive into the exercises now, we do the raffle. So it's your final chance to participate. If you don't type in !raffle within the next 10 seconds or so, then I'll close it. So and then you have one more chance next week, but today will be over. So yeah, I wish you all best of luck. Again, the bot will decide. So I guess you and I, we will be very out of the question to manipulate anything. So here we go. I'll close entries in 3, 2, 1 now. All right, make it very official and pick winner. Okay, Michael Bateman, you are the winner of this episode 8 signed book. Congratulations, Michael. As ever, I'll send in chat my email address. Please send me your details with the address where we can ship it to, and if we should dedicate this book, or rather if Will should dedicate this book to somebody else or to yourself, and then we will get everything ready for you. Yeah, thank you. Congratulations.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations, Michael. And I've seen you on here a few times over the last few weeks entering the raffle, so glad you got it today. Great. Well, let's jump in to our exercises for the day. See if we can get through these in the time we have left. So the first one here says use Neo4j Bloom to find the user who has reviewed businesses belonging to the greatest number of categories. What are the categories of the businesses this user has reviewed? And then we have a hint. Creating a Bloom search phrase might be helpful. Consult the documentation here. Cool. So let's take a look at the documentation link that we were given as a hint in the Bloom features in detail. So if you're not familiar with Bloom, Bloom is a visualization tool that allows us to explore our graph visually and interactively without the user having to write Cypher. So we saw Neo4j browser where we're writing some Cypher statements. We get back little graph visualizations to help us interpret the results, but really Neo4j browser is not meant to be a graph visualization tool. It's really like a query workbench for writing Cypher and visualizing results. If we're maybe say like an analyst type or someone who is not comfortable or doesn't want to write Cypher, maybe like an end user for some application we've built, Bloom can provide that sort of visual exploration functionality, which is quite neat. And the reason we're talking about Bloom in this chapter is because we're looking at Neo4j Aura for deploying our database, and Bloom is available with Neo4j Aura. So let's take a look at Bloom. So here's Aura. I've already created my database. I'm going to open it in Workspace. Workspace is a somewhat new alternative. Actually, we can still toggle back to the classic experience. I'll zoom in a little bit too.
Yeah, I think that was released sometime late last year in beta. It's still in beta or early access. So we are looking for your feedback. So if you use Workspace and have some kind of issues with it or find some features lacking, please let us know via the this little get help thing there where it's where you can type in feedback, and yeah, it's very cool because you have everything in one tab. So before here you had to explore, query, and support every. Worst case, you open the 3 different tabs in your browser, and then you had to juggle between the windows. And Workspace, everything is combined in one user interface.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if your Aura dashboard looks a little bit different, you see these 3 options. You can toggle here to the workspace, and you'll see just a single tab, which will open workspace here, which combines the functionality of Neo4j browser, Bloom, and the data importer.
Yep.
Cool. So we need our password, which I'll just grab out of .env file here. And by default, it'll take us to the Explore tab, which is the functionality of Bloom for visualization.
Yep.
And so the question is, find the user who has reviewed the most, or reviewed businesses in the most number of categories. So it's kind of like who's our most prolific explorer of different businesses. I don't know. I don't know what you would call that. And so to approach this, what we'll do is first, I guess, take a look at some of the natural language search functionality in Bloom. And so the way we can explore data in Bloom is to kind of start typing essentially what we're looking for. So we're interested in users who have written a review that reviews a business that's in a category. And that's, slide this over so we have a little more Bloom space. That's pretty much our entire graph here. We can do things like if we, let's clear the scene here. And maybe I was just interested in, let's say like user with the name Will. I just want to know what reviews of businesses one single user has given. Now I have a view in my scene. This is called the Bloom scene. Just now for the single user. And I can explore the graph interactively, so I can expand from individual nodes. I can view details of nodes and so on. Let's go back to the view that we had that was basically our whole graph, where we had user, writes a review of a business, and actually let's start here. And so if we want to go from the business to the category, there's one thing I can do is do expand from our individual business nodes and start to see the categories. And I can kind of then count from the users to the categories. But of course, that's not going to work for a big graph. I want some way to
no.
I want some way to sort of visualize this information. And this is where I guess some of the configuration that we can do in Bloom comes in handy. And so the hint that we had was use a search phrase to do this, and we were linked some examples for the search phrase. So one thing that's really cool about Bloom is that if we know Cypher, we can configure Bloom to add some things like search phrases where we create a parameterized Cypher query that then users of Bloom can access just with natural search, and they don't have to know that a cipher query is being run in the background. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to create this search phrase that is going to give us the user who's reviewed the most number of categories, and then we'll be able to use that in Bloom. But first, we'll need to go over to the query tab and figure out what this cipher query is going to be. So let's zoom in a bit and start writing some cipher. So we know the basic pattern that we're looking for is where a user wrote a review, and that review reviews a business.
Oh, this is basically what you earlier in Bloom, what you just clicked together. This is the query if you were to write it in Cypher.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so here's our basic pattern. So user wrote a review, that review reviews a business, and that business is in a category. And so what we want to do now is find the user with the most number of categories. So we might do something like with user, so let's just say, let's group by user.name, and then we'll get a count of the distinct categories, and let's call that, I don't know, number of categories. And let's order by categories, descending, and go ahead and return that. Oh, we need alias u.name. Let's call that user. Okay, and so we can see here that both Will and Bob have reviewed businesses in 7 different categories. And if we go over to Bloom, and if we looked at the entire graph, we could count that to verify that. But I think that sounds good. And what we want to do now is use this in a search phrase in Bloom. So I'm going to copy this. And now go back to the Explore tab. And I'm going to tweak my perspective. So a perspective in Bloom is how we configure the visualization. So Bloom is really nice in that we can configure like what data is exposed, how it shows up. We can do things like rule-based styling, where if, say, we have degree or page rank or something like that as a property on a node, those nodes can be bigger than others, and similarly for relationships. But what we're interested in is the saved cipher. And these are called search phrases, where we've taken a cipher query here and defined a search phrase. So this is what the user types in, but behind the scenes, this is the cipher query that runs. And so by default, there's this show me a graph cipher query. So if you've ever seen that in Bloom and wondered, okay, well, what is this actually doing? So this will always show up as one of your first options here. This is just finding some paths in the graph by executing this cipher statement.
Yeah, it's just a random set of nodes and relationships, just to give you an impression, rather, what your graph looks like, and what there is to see.
Exactly, which is super helpful if your goal is to explore and
yes,
kind of don't know what you're looking for, right? Like
yep.
start somewhere. Totally.
Yep.
Okay, what we want to do is add a search phrase, and let's call this user with most categories, something like this. and this will be our description. So the search phrase is what the user is going to type, and we'll see how to add parameters to this in a second. And then description, I think this is like the helper text.
Yeah, there's always a little explainer what to expect from this query if it's not as clear from the search phrase itself.
And so we'll paste in our query here. I guess what we want to do in this case is not return text. So we'll just say, we'll just bring through the user node instead of just the name. We still want to do our order by the number of distinct categories. And then let's return, let's do another with here. And we'll put in our limit and return the user node.
Yeah, because remember, this is a visualization, so this is not meant for it. It cannot even return table structure, so it is a graph visualization tool, so it needs to return either a path or a single node, yeah, or a set of nodes, right? But not a list of like we showed earlier in the table view.
Totally, exactly. But now I can come in here and say, give me the user with most categories. Actually, let me clear the scene before we run this so it's obvious. So users with most categories, and we get back one user. Okay, that's fine. We can expand out from here and so on, but it's not obvious that this user has reviews or connected to businesses and categories. So let's capture the paths here. Because as you said, Alex, we have to return nodes or paths. So let's define a variable p that's going to capture the whole path. And then when we do our group by here, so we're grouping by user to get the count of categories. So we need to do a collect on all of our paths grouped by that user. So this will bring through our paths, but then here, let's bring through the paths as well. And then we're going to unwind over the paths and return those paths. Since I don't think we can just return an array of paths and have that be rendered properly. That might work, I'm not sure, but this will.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's clear our scene. And we can say user with most categories. And now we get the user node, but now we get all the paths to the different categories. We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 categories of different businesses that this user has reviewed. Cool, but we said we can also add parameters here. And the way we do that is in the search phrase, you can say, let's change this to, let's say top num users. So we add this $ num. This now will refer to a parameter. So instead of users with most categories, I'm going to type in something like top 3 users with most categories. And I need to say this is a integer for validation. I can offer some search suggestions for what the kind of like helper text for the user. We'll leave that blank, but this is cool because we can run a Cypher query to give possible answers here. I don't think we need that in this case. And then I can use this as a Cypher parameter. So instead of limit 1, we're going to do limit num, and that's whatever number the user types in. So let's try this. We'll clear the scene. And now we're going to say, let's try this with just top 1 users with most categories. We should get something exactly the same. Yep, cool. But now if I change this to, let's clear our scene. And let's say, how about top 2 users with most categories? Now I should see Will and this other user, Bob. This node here are both returned in all the paths to the different categories of the businesses of that user's reviews. And I could keep going here. Show me 3 users, and that should add some more to the graph. So what's nice about this is I can then give Bloom, now that I've configured it, to another user who doesn't know Cypher, doesn't care to write Cypher, but has this functionality available to them. So you can think of Bloom as almost kind of like a UI, graph-based UI that we can configure and expose to our end users based on the data that we have available. So pretty cool.
Yep, that's pretty cool.
Search
Especially
phrases.
for users that like not very technical or don't want to be technical or don't need to be. You give him this and have a couple of these queries predefined, and then it's very easy.
Totally, and if it's something like an internal app or something like that, I don't need to build a whole web application or a custom UI. If this sort of functionality works for my purposes. So I like Bloom. There's lots of cool things going on in Bloom. There's now an integration with Graph Data Science, so I can run graph algorithms with just a few clicks if I'm using the Graph Data Science library. There's a slicer for selecting by time range now. We can use full text search. So lots of cool things in Bloom.
Yep.
Okay, so that was the first one. Number 2, we want to update business review application to always order results by business name, and then use Netlify to give us a test before we open a pull request. So let's jump back to our code here. And so I'm running Netlify dev, so our app should still be running somewhere. And that's here it is, here's our local one. So the assignment is to change the ordering of businesses so that they're always ordered by name. And so if we go to, that's in app.js, here's our GraphQL query. Currently doesn't specify any ordering, but we know that, as we've seen, I think this was introduced maybe in chapter 4, is this idea of pagination and ordering. There's a sort argument alongside where, or actually there's an options, and one of the options is sort, and we want to sort by name descending. Actually, I don't think we want descending. I think we want ascending, but we can see it right here. So what's nice about this is when we're using Netlify, we automatically have a watcher that's watching for any files that are changing and then restarts our app automatically, which is quite nice. So instead we want this in ascending order. And now they're in alphabetical order, from Ducky's Car Wash to Zootown Brew. Cool. So we tested that with Netlify. We can also, if we didn't know that we have this options argument and the sort, we can always go to our GraphQL API, which I think is running localhost GraphQL. Yeah, so we can use Apollo Studio and go in and take a look at our documentation. So if we go in and take a look at businesses, the arguments, we can see we have options here for sorting and the different sort orders. So by default, we get the options for sorting by each field on the type. That's part of the generated GraphQL schema that we get with the Neo4j GraphQL library.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. That's good. And the next one here is create a new Netlify function that uses the Neo4j JavaScript driver to query our Aura cluster and return a list of the most recent reviews. Run it locally using Netlify dev, and then redirect it to /reviews. Okay, cool. So this one sounds like we're not going to actually use GraphQL to do this. We're going to just use the Neo4j JavaScript driver and Netlify functions. So let's see what we can learn about Netlify functions. The basic idea of a function is we have some code and the way this works is we have a directory in our Netlify project that contains all of our functions. And so any file that we add here, we're going to get a new endpoint, a new endpoint that will be deployed as a Lambda function that matches the name of the file. And then we can use our configuration here in this netlify.toml file to add any redirects. And so by default, our functions are namespaced under /.netlify/functions, but if we don't want to expose that path to the world, and so we can redirect that to just /GraphQL. So that's why I can go to localhost 888/GraphQL, and that's redirecting to the default of where my Netlify function is deployed. Okay, so let's create a new file in our Lambda folder. Call this reviews. And I'm just going to copy this example here as a starting point. And when I save that, we can see, because I'm still running Netlify dev, I think it's added our new endpoint. So if we go to localhost 8888/ what is it, .netlify/functions/reviews. .netlify functions reviews. Maybe I do need to restart. Netlify dev. Give that a refresh, and we want .netlify functions reviews. There we go. So I did need to restart the Netlify dev command to pick that up. Okay, so if we see what's going on here, well, we're just going out to catfact.heroku app to grab some, I guess, cat facts. Did you know? Yeah, this is interesting. Did you know that cats make 100 different sounds? Well, dogs can only make about 10.
No, I did not know that. Did not know that.
I think my cat makes about 2 sounds, so I don't know. maybe humans are not able to perceive.
Maybe you didn't listen properly before, Will. I mean, she was trying to tell you things, and you just said, "Oh, 2 sounds." Oh, what is it? I like you. I want more food. I did hunt a mouse. I don't know.
Perhaps we'll have to do some research. I don't know the origin of these alleged facts. Yeah. Okay, so we're going out and fetching the cat facts and just returning that. So okay, cool. So that's a good starting point. let's, instead of grabbing cat facts, let's grab some business reviews. And so we'll pull in the Neo4j JavaScript driver, which we've already installed. And we need the connection credentials for our database, which we've set as environment variables. It's worth noting here, I guess, that we have this .env file locally where we're setting these environment variables. When we deploy to Netlify, because we don't want to check in that .env file into version control, we want to keep our secrets private to us, we can add, so we can see, where is it here? Yeah, site overview. We add environment variables when we configured this. And so we added our environment variables when we set up our application.
Okay. This is explained in the book, I guess, but it's a chapter we skipped a little bit, or we didn't skip, but the parts we jumped over.
Yeah, exactly. It's covered in the book. I went ahead and did it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Did it before the stream, so we're not watching me fat finger environment variable names on my new keyboard.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are set for us in the Netlify console, and this is nice because we may have like a development testing environment, so we're connected to a different database. Maybe we're using a different Auth0 tenant locally for testing, and then when it goes to Netlify for production, we want to use those environment variables. Okay, so let's go back to our, I want to see more of our cat facts on the screen. Okay, so we need our connection credentials, which we've defined as environment variables. So that's Neo4j URI, Neo4j user, and Neo4j password. And then we'll create a new driver instance. So Neo4j URI, that's going to be the connection string for our Aura instance. And our Neo4j user and password. Okay, so now we have a driver instance, and let's go in here. Let's get rid of this. So in the body of our function, let's see. Let's create a array here, and so we're going to execute a Cypher query. It's going to return a bunch of reviews, and then we'll populate this array, and then JSON stringify this array and return that from our endpoint. Didn't specify if we want to return like a HTML table or JSON is fine. Treat this like a JSON endpoint. So the first thing we're going to do is create a session object. And we can optionally specify the database if we're using multiple databases. By default with Aura, we're using the Neo4j database. But a session is something that we use to represent a unit of work, I suppose. Behind the scenes, there's some connection pooling that goes on. So a session isn't necessarily mapping one-to-one to a connection to the database, but we think of session as kind of a lightweight thing that we can create and destroy when we have some unit of work to execute in the database. But we always want to close the session object when we're done. So I always like to wrap anything I do with a session in a try catch. So in catch block, we'll catch any errors that come through. We'll log the error. And then I guess we return an error code, so 500 server error. and some message. Failed fetching reviews. So if we encounter some error in our try block here, we'll just return a 500 error from our endpoint. And then here in the finally block, we will close our session. We want to make sure we always remove those so we aren't unnecessarily hanging on to a connection to the database if we don't need it.
Okay. Yep.
So now we need a Cypher query here. The Cypher query. Let's call this reviews query. And let's say, let's just start off real simple. Let's get all the reviews and return the text of the review as R. So we'll maybe build on this, but initially that's fine. Let's just return the text of all of our reviews. So then my computer froze for a second. That's scary. Okay. Hopefully I'm still there. Looks like it.
You're still here. Yes, yes.
Okay, not sure what's going on there. So we're going to do a execute read. So there's a few different ways to execute Cypher queries with the Neo4j JavaScript driver and with the drivers in general. This session.execute read, this is called a transaction function. There's a shorthand, which is session.run, which just kind of, by default, will use a write connection. In this case, we're doing a read query, so we don't need the write permissions or different ways that the queries are routed through our cluster. So if we know we're going to be doing a read query, we can do this execute read transaction function. This will route the query to any member of our cluster. It doesn't need to be a cluster that coordinates writes and so on, but we don't need to concern ourselves with this. We just know that using these transaction functions gives us things like automatic retries if for some reason the query fails and so on. So generally it's better to use these transaction functions. A lot of times you'll see someone just say session.run for convenience, which is fine for like local testing and things, but definitely consider using transaction functions as much as possible. Okay, we've got our results now. And so let's just iterate over these. So for each record in our results, let's push this to our reviews array in, what did we say, R. So for each record, so a record is each row that we've returned from our query, and we can have multiple columns. Here we just have one, which is R, which is why we're saying record.getR here. So this is going to add the text of each review to this array, reviews. And then if we've gotten this far, I think we're ready to return results. So we'll return a status code 200, okay, and the body, JSON stringify our reviews array. Okay, so is that reloaded? So now if we refresh, I'm very sad our cat facts are going to go away. It's our,
Shall we read one more? Technical term for a cat's hairball is a bezoar. Okay.
I've never heard that, and I am not going to Google that to verify. How about this last one? Cats are the most popular pet in the US. 88 million pet cats and 74 million dogs. That's not that much more cats than dogs, really.
That's true.
All right, end of cat facts.
It's a lot, though. Yeah. So we got an error.
We got an error, and we're logging that error where here. Can I read properties of undefined reading records on line 25? Is there an error before that? What do we get? So result, execute read, result dot records. And is this a bogus cipher query? I don't think so. Let's take a look. Go to our query tab. So here's the cipher query we're running. Okay, so we get back, that should work, session.execute read, await, reviews query, results.records.forEach. Well, let's log our result object here. Slash reviews. And we get an error, cannot read property of records. Execute read, there's our transaction. We're awaiting here. So we should have our results. We have our session. Reviews query, that's what we're running. Do we even get to, I don't see, oh, we've logged, so my result is undefined. So this is undefined. We do await here, await session dot execute read, tx.run, reviews query. But for some reason, our result object is undefined. I'm not sure why. Let's restart here. I don't see any obvious errors. I will restart, go back to our function. And if we run it, it is undefined reading records. So let's take a look at Neo4j JavaScript driver. Let's try, instead of a transaction function here, let's try our convenient session.run. So we'll say results is await session.run. We want to run our reviews query. Let's try that. Okay, so that worked. I'm not sure why. Maybe I had a typo or something in our transaction function there. But this is the alternative. We can do a session.run here, which will execute our query. And so we can see here now we just have the text of our reviews, which is okay, but that's maybe not all the information that we want here. So we could add a bit more to our Cypher query. So maybe we want to include the business. And then one thing with this sort of style where we're mapping a JSON endpoint to a Cypher query, I often like to use the convention of sort of projecting out the result, so into an object. And so something like this for grab the date and maybe the business name as well. So here, now we're grabbing the business name and the review, and then we're projecting that out into this object that we better call R. So now in our array, we should have a bit more information. So now we see the stars, the text, the date, and the name of the business that we've returned as kind of a JSON object.
Yeah. This also makes more sense, right, in terms of context, especially now with these null reviews. Okay, somebody gave a star but didn't write a review, so we don't even know what it's talking about if we were just to say null.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so now we have a bit more information. We have an endpoint, maps to our reviews. The last part of the question was to add a redirect. So instead of .netlify/function/reviews, just like what we did with the GraphQL endpoint, we want to redirect .netlify/functions/reviews to just /reviews. So if we go to localhost /reviews, now we can see our reviews endpoint. Cool. So that's our last of our exercises. We got that up and running. I'll have to take a look at what I was doing wrong with that transaction function. I'm going to blame my new keyboard and some fat fingering there, but we got it working. So
exactly, as long as it works in the end. I think that's the most important thing.
Cool. So with that, did we do all these? Yeah. We did the configuration. We did our sorting by business name, and we took a look at Bloom with the search phrases.
Sounds good. Very cool. I see one question from Tim. Is the GraphQL library asynchronous?
Yeah. So yes, I guess that there's maybe one thing that's more relevant is if we look in our GraphQL Lambda code, creating and specifically creating the schema, the GraphQL executable schema object with the Neo4j GraphQL library is an asynchronous process. And so that's why we have this init server function here, because we need to asynchronously call this asynchronous function get schema, which goes to the database to verify database state based on what we've defined in our GraphQL type definition. So we could have things in there that are maybe like enforcing cardinality or defining indexes. And so when we generate the schema, that's an asynchronous process because that happens in the background to verify some database state. So there's a little bit of additional setup here with this init server. So I think that's what you're asking about, asynchronous operations with the GraphQL library. But yeah, something to think about there.
Yep. Cool. Okay, I guess that brings us to the end of chapter 8. Thank you very much, Will. As we said, this is the almost the last episode now. Chapter 9 is happening next week. Same place, same time. So on the it's already February next week, 1st of February. We do chapter 9 of our GraphQL book. Another chance to win a book. So if you haven't won today or in the previous episodes, you can win one more time on the 1st of February. And yeah, a couple other things happening between now and then, I guess. I'm doing another Discover AuraDB free episode with Michael on Monday on the 30th. So if you are interested in Aura, heard a little bit here and want to know more, then on Monday I do another session there. And on the 31st, I have a Neo4j live with the team of Crosser. It's a knowledge graph for drug discovery. So if you're into healthcare, life sciences, if that is something you're interested in, then join us then. Otherwise, we'll be back on the Wednesday next week. So with that,
great. We'll see you then.
See you then. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for joining, and for the questions. Thank you, Will, for the time and the exercises help. And yeah, with that, I wish you all a great rest of your day and see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers.